changes forever the year his dock opens for business. The event turns the former village into a thriving town, and the dock itself goes on to become one of the busiest ports in Britain. Small wonder that an imposing statue of David Davis stands today outside the town's dock offices. He is, in a very real sense, the man who built Barry. David Davis may bring economic benefits to Barry, but he and other coal bosses often fail to show any sense of social responsibility. And that causes serious trouble in South Wales from the 1880s on. Widespread discontent springs up at that time among the region's miners. It stems above all from the appalling conditions in which they're forced to work.
So this is known as the bank. It's actually the
To get a better idea of what those conditions were like, I've arranged to meet former miner Kerry Thompson.
How are you? No cigarettes, matches, lights? Nothing, no. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay.
Having worked at the coalface for many years, Kerry is now a curator here at Big Pit, a working coal mine turned into a living museum on the eastern edge of the South Wales coalfield.
Any lights on? It's going to get dark.
He's going to show me around the old mine workings to give me a better idea of what life was like for the men and the boys who worked in places like this just over a century ago.
Hello there.
Hello, how are you?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Very well, thanks. Thanks a lot, good.
Careful coming
Thank
off.
you very much. Straight down.
Sit down.
So we've been entering the mine, Kerry, but we're nowhere near the face, are we?
You could be a few miles before you actually get to where the men worked on the coalface.
As long as that.
As long as that. These are the motorways on their way in.
Their long walk to work takes Victorian miners to the beating heart of the pit, the coalface itself.
So round here, Kerry, is where the business happens.
This is the main part of the pit. This is where it all happens. This is called a stall. There's probably hundreds of these in the pits in South Wales.
So this is kind of a work area for one miner? How many miners?
Well, usually a miner and a boy. Now, the boy could be his son, it could be his nephew, it could be a complete stranger.
And what's the boy doing?
The boy is actually loading the dram up.
A dram is a metal wagon used to transport coal. The collier and his young workmate, or butty, have to fill dozens of them to earn a decent day's pay.
This is called a curling box. The young boy, could be 12, 14 years old. He would fill the large lump, which the collier has cut, put it into the curling box, and then drag it or carry it back up the stall road. So he's doing that dozens and dozens and dozens of times a day.
And it's heavy.
And it's heavy, and he's a little boy. You know,
It does make you think.
it does make you think. And I've heard people saying that they couldn't even reach over the top of the drum. They were so short, they had to put a block in to stand up so they could actually get over the lid of the drum.
So it's incredibly hard work.
It is incredibly hard work.
But hard work isn't the half of it. All the time he's underground, the average miner is exposed to life-threatening hazards.
The worst thing he's going to face is the fact that the roof is going to come down if he's not careful, and also the sides is going to come in on him.
What are the other risks? What are the other dangers they face?
Well, it's gases, because as soon as you start cutting coal, you start producing methane gas, which we call fire damp underground. So that will cause an explosion. The other main one, of course, is called after damp, and it occurs basically after an explosion. The oxygen has been burned out of the air, and you're left with a mixture of carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and other gases again.
How devastating is that?
That's what kills most men after an explosion. The actual blast itself might kill few, no? But it's the actual after damp that kills them all.
Thousands of miners lose their lives during the Victorian era, not just in South Wales, but in the coalfield of North East Wales too. The deaths helped to create a mood of militancy among the men. Towards the end of the 19th century, in the southern coalfield, things come to a head. The South Wales miners go on strike. The strike turns into a lockout. It lasts 6 months and ends badly from the miners' point of view. They react by forming a new trade union, the South Wales Miners' Federation, commonly known as the Fed. For the next 50 years, the Fed will play a prominent role in Welsh life, giving leadership and support to people in the coalfield. And it'll still be fondly remembered long after it's swallowed up by the National Union of Mine Workers in 1945. Having said all that, the Fed isn't always as bold and as dynamic and as assertive as some of its members would like it to be. The union's leaders are afraid of seeming too radical, and miners' working conditions fail to improve as a result. The frustration builds up, and it will explode into violence later on. Well before that happens, major industrial unrest breaks out in what might seem at first like a very unlikely setting. What we see here today is a nature reserve. It's nice and peaceful. It's a very different story at the turn of the 20th century. This place is full of noise. It's teeming with workers. The lake isn't here. There's an immense hole in the ground because this is the site of the old Penrhyn slate quarry. And it is here in November of 1900 that we see the beginning of one of the most brutal industrial disputes in British history. The day the strike is called, every one of the 2,000 men employed at the quarry downs tools and walks off the job. They don't realise it, but they've been tricked into doing this by their employer, the second Baron Penrhyn. The Baron is a man who hates trade unions, and he's goaded his men into going on strike because he thinks that will benefit him. He expects the strike to collapse within a few weeks, ridding the quarry of union interference, as he calls it. But it's not what happens. Instead of ending quickly, as the Baron expects it to, the strike drags on, and it causes huge tension in the area. This row of houses in the village of Tregarth is thrown up by Baron Penrhyn to accommodate striking miners who've agreed to go back to work. It becomes the site of angry scenes. As the strike drags on, local communities are poisoned by the anger and the resentment. The names and addresses of men who return to work are published in local newspapers. They sometimes find their homes under attack. And then in nearby Bethesda, these little notices start to appear in people's windows. Nid oes bradwr yn y tŷ hwn. That is a very stark message. There are no traitors in this house. The dispute lasts for 3 years and becomes known as the Great Strike. It's the longest dispute in British industrial history, and it has some terrible effects. Towns like Bethesda are torn apart by the strike. Scars are created that take decades to heal. Even worse is the effect it has on the North Wales slate industry. It makes it seem unreliable. Orders dry up, and thousands of men are laid off. It is a disaster for North Wales. The region enters a prolonged economic slump. The people are stunned. But as the 20th century gets into its stride, they do at least have one thing to cheer about. And that is the rise to the top of British politics of that great North Wales liberal, David Lloyd George. Lloyd George is one of the most inspiring orators Britain has ever produced, a world-class statesman and a personal hero of mine. Raised in a cottage near Criccieth, he enters Parliament in 1890 as the MP for Caernarfon boroughs. But he doesn't hit his stride politically until 1908. Herbert Asquith, who becomes Prime Minister that year, spots his huge potential and makes him Chancellor of the Exchequer. Lloyd George throws himself into his new job, and he has an immediate impact. It takes Lloyd George just 12 months to come up with one of the biggest reform programmes ever seen here at Westminster. It's called the People's Budget. It's a raft of policies to help the poor, paid for by the rich landowners who control the House of Lords. Rather predictably, they block the budget. There's a big showdown. Lloyd George wins, and the impact of that victory is immense. For the first time, Britain has an old age pension, national insurance, and much else besides. It's the start of the welfare state. The reforms make Lloyd George a hero to people all over Wales and strengthen the hold which the Liberal Party enjoys over the hearts and minds of Welsh voters. The party is dominant here in the South Wales valleys as it is everywhere else. In other ways, though, this part of Wales is moving further and further apart now from the rest of the country. Migration to the coalfield has brought about a huge increase in the population. Most of the newcomers have come from England, and that has started to cause major change. The census of 1911 points up what's been going on. It reveals that in places like Part3, the arrival of lots of English people has placed the Welsh language under serious threat. On one level, the language is in good health. In 1911, it is still spoken in homes and in places of worship throughout Wales. But on another level, there are some worrying signs. Some 40% of Welsh people don't understand the language. And here, where it matters, on the streets, the shops, the pubs, there's a noticeable decline. By 1911, almost 1 million people speak Welsh, more than ever before. But the presence in towns like this of thousands of people who don't understand the language has started to chip away at the central role it plays in public life. This will cause great concern in Wales later on, but it doesn't create much anxiety at this time in the coalfield itself. Valley's people are swept along by the headlong rush of events, and many of them are thrilled to be part of the new society that's springing into life all around them. A lively, bilingual community is emerging, with new pastimes and new heroes as well. Preachers and choir masters are still respected, but so too are popular entertainers of all kinds. In Treorchy's Park and Dare Theatre, you can summon up the ghosts of some of the characters the people of the coalfield worship during the Edwardian era. Here, for instance, comes the great South Wales boxer Freddie Welsh, soon to become the lightweight champion of the world. And here's Dai Taru Jones, a key member of the heroic rugby union side that beats the All Blacks in Cardiff Arms Park in 1905. Rugby, boxing and soccer are hugely popular in the coalfield, as they are in the rest of Wales. But other forms of entertainment are well liked too. Throughout the Edwardian era, Valley's people lap up the work of opera singers and comedians.
3 Englishmen walk into a bar.
And brass band musicians, not to mention lots of others. They're all part of the rich cultural mix that exists in South Wales in the run-up to the First World War. But we mustn't let ourselves be blinded by nostalgia. Away from the theatres and the sports grounds, life remains incredibly tough for most people, coal miners in particular. Welsh coal is still popular worldwide, but conditions down the mines remain as dreadful as ever, and pay rates never seem to rise. The anger this creates has to be released somehow. It explodes finally in the form of civil